Folks, the simple does solve the complex. One of the things that I was amazed with my first year of speaking professionally was how many people didn't want a straightforward, simple, let's get the ball rolling, something that you can do to build a habit or build the momentum. They wanted a complex 17-point plan that would take them months to implement. And I think that's because it's in how we look at the problems we have. There's no doubt that our problems are complex at times and just outright overwhelming. And if you think about a problem you've had recently and think about how you felt about it, the initial stages of when feelings and emotions surface, you probably were not in a real good spot to deal with it. It was probably overwhelming. It was challenging you. You couldn't think clearly. And a lot of times what we think right in that moment is the solution must match the current feeling of the problem. Or we come up with some type of weight, breadth, depth, intensity of the problem, and then we think that the solution must be the same. It must have the same breadth, depth, intensity to it, complexity. And when I think about this, I think about a story from NASA in the early days of the Gemini and Apollo program. NASA struggled on how are the astronauts going to write in outer space. They had to be able to write things down, to do equations and checklists, and even just take messages of things that needed to be done from Houston, and they had to have a way to write things down. NASA toiled with the Fisher Pen Company as to how this was going to happen. How are we going to get them to write upside down, zero gravity? Fisher Pen said, well, we'll develop a pen that not only can write in zero gravity, you can write upside down, sideways. You could write underwater on a completely wet surface. And they spent a tremendous amount of time, energy, and of course money into coming up with the Fisher Space Pen. At the same time, as you know, the space race was on, and the Russians were launching their space program. And when they came up against the challenge of how are the astronauts, the cosmonauts, going to write in space, they simply said, well, let's have them use a pencil. You see, the simple solves the complex. Instead of getting caught up in the overwhelm of, oh my gosh, zero gravity, upside down, sideways, density of ink, the actual spacing of the roller ball at the end of the pen, the Russians simply said, hey, how about a pencil? It works every direction, upside down, sideways. Now, some of you might be thinking, I don't know about underwater. Well, if you think about it, again, we're trying to solve for really one problem, zero gravity. The astronauts really weren't going to be doing much writing underwater. At least let's hope not, right? So my point is that the next time you get hit with a problem, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the problem and trying to figure out what's really behind the problem, as in the root cause. But one of the things to be thinking about as you identify the root cause of the problem and you start to move into building a solution, think about, is there anything that could be done that falls in the category of the simple solving the complex? Not going with the most complex and challenging actions to get things started, but could I do something very simply, not necessarily to solve the problem completely, but to get it started or put it in a little better place? I was doing an activity last week in Anaheim with a client, and it was an activity that they got to use some tools, they got to use a couple things to build this tower with index cards. One of the items was Scotch tape. And you do the activity and they get it with Scotch tape. And then the second round is the same number of index cards, but they have to build the tallest tower without Scotch tape. I can't tell you the last time a group didn't mention that it was much easier to build a tall tower without the Scotch tape. You think the Scotch tape would help, but it adds to the problem because it's another something or other to deal with. You got to figure out how long of a piece of Scotch tape or where to put the Scotch tape. When they made it more simple, not so complex with all the building and all the design and all the index cards, you take away the Scotch tape, all of a sudden now, instead of being complex, it becomes very simple. They have just one item to deal with, and it's about taking those index cards and stacking them up to make that tall tower. So again, I suggest to you, when you get hit with a problem, spend time thinking about the root cause and come up with what's the root cause and what is the solution. And as you set off on the journey to solve that problem, think about, is there anything, always be filtering and sorting, is there anything that falls into the category that I can do that would be simple, that would help solve a complex problem? Until next time, folks, take care of yourself so you can take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next video.